So, some people tell me that CSS is not a programming language, which kind of means that I am not a real programmer. I don't know. Aww. Because I always ask, like, why do you believe this? Why do you believe that CSS is not a programming language? And I usually get a variety of answers. I hear that in order for CSS to be a programming language, well, at least it should be able to round some units. Something that should be possible. Okay, sure, I'll take that. I hear that in order for CSS to be a programming language, well, it at least should have booleans, right? You cannot have a programming language without booleans. You need booleans. And also, last but not least, it should be able to handle some very, very difficult maths. It's very important. And even when I show people, like, hey, this is possible nowadays, I usually get pretty much the same answer. Yeah, that's all fine, but it's still not a programming language. Because you cannot even type CSS. And what's worse, it is probably the worst language ever because it doesn't have scoping. Now, I don't know if we should call it a layout language, maybe we should call it a layout engineering language. All that I can tell you is that CSS has evolved a lot in the last couple of years. And I mean, this is only just an intro. This is not, I do the web standard stuff, I talk about new fancy features. This is not about that today. Today is just an intro into engineering CSS, from type to function. So you had a little intro by me. My name is Brecht. Hi, nice to see all of you. I'm happy so many people are still interested in CSS. Love it, fantastic. And I'm a front-end developer currently working at I.O., which is also a sponsor. Been working there for 8 years. Got to be something good about there, right? And I'm also a Google developer expert on web UI and CSS, which has been a lot of fun being part of that community. A little shout out to Rowdy there. Hey, man. Awesome. I also write on my own personal blog, utilityband.com, and sometimes a bit of guest writing. But on my own blog, I write a bit about UX, I write a bit about accessibility, but most and foremost, I like to write about CSS, because CSS is the most beautiful language on the web, right? Note takers? Was worth a try. Then, yeah, of course, you heard W3C community groups love doing that work, but once again, not what I'm going to go on about, because I want to talk to you about something very revolutionary. I want to talk to you about custom properties. Custom properties. You've probably heard about CSS variables before. Why am I going to talk to you about custom properties? Well, I still see people only using custom properties as a constant, which I don't understand, because they are the fundamentals of engineering in CSS, and people are really missing out nowadays. They can be overwritten. They can have a fallback. They can contain anything you want. This is important, remember that. They can be typed, and they can also be controlled with JavaScript. They are so much more than just a constant. And to illustrate this kind of behavior, I created a little case that I'd like to show you to get us a bit in that engineering mindset, to warm you all up a little bit, a case that I'd like to call the button case. Everybody has probably styled some buttons in this room? Yeah, one or two, yeah. It's a thing. We're going to create these 4 buttons, right? You've probably seen buttons like this before, very basic buttons. You have a primary, you have a secondary, you have a primary outline button, and you have a secondary outline button, design system 101, right, kind of that thing. And this is a simplified HTML that you can use for that. You have a button, which is your default, your primary, you have a secondary, you have an outline, and your outline, secondary. I'm probably not impressing you right now. Don't worry, no worries. These buttons kind of have some default styles, which I'm not going to repeat the whole time. They have some padding, border radius, font size, cursor, and a very lazy transition. Please don't do that. Use the correct properties. It's better for your performance as well. But it's a demo. I can just do that if I want to. So let's start engineering. Focus on what do these buttons have in common. We're going to create these buttons. So what I think about is like they change color. When you hover over them, they change color. Same with focus. So let's recreate those filled buttons in a very simple and elegant way. What I would do, I would set a custom property scope to my button, such as color, and I will give that the color white. Then I'll have a background and a border that will read that custom property as white. Now, my buttons have just the color black. This makes it easy. Simple demo, of course. And then what I would do, instead of just redefining the color property, I would just override that custom property on hover and focus. When the secondary button, that color should be light green. When that secondary button is hovered or focused, that column should be lawn green. Love some CSS color names, but pretty much this would create those two fill buttons right away. Just that little bit of chunk of code. That's all you need. Now, I do want to take this one step further and work with a private variable. Don't worry, you haven't missed anything in CSS. Private variables aren't a thing. But it's kind of a convention that we use by adding an underscore to our custom property. Are there any people who have written JavaScript in the olden days before we had const and let? Did you use an underscore to declare private variables? Yes, you did. Well, that's kind of where that came from. So we set a background in there, and I'm going to use that private variable. So nothing is really changing yet. This is pretty much still the same code as before. The only thing is it's kind of looping, right? That color comes in that custom property, then it's going to be filled, and it's going to fill that background and border, and by default it is white, which is my primary button's color. Still making no crazy stuff. So before we go on, let's quickly fill those outline buttons with just doing this. Set the background to transparent, set that color to that private variable color, and ta-da, a bunch of buttons. That's it. That's all you need to create these 4 buttons. So this is the output, CSS part 1. You have this one little button. Then you have the second part, which is my secondary button, my hover states, and my button outline. Now, I do need to be an honest person, and I do have to address the elephant in the room here. I know that there are much more modern approaches to do this nowadays. I know this is absolutely, I don't want to say anything bad about this. I think utility-first CSS can be a very good thing. Absolutely, do whatever makes you happy. If this is a tool that makes you money, that's fine. What you do with your money, maybe you want to buy a new screen, I really don't care. I mean, if it makes you happy, do the thing. But that little bit of beautiful engineered code is still something that I love to see. But to be honest, like, how long would this be in utility-first CSS? Well, I did the math. It used to be a lot longer, but now at the latest, it's still about 80 lines of CSS, just for 4 buttons. I think that's crazy. That's a lot. I'm just styling buttons. So I was wondering, can I make this even smaller? Can I make my code even smaller to create 4 buttons? And I could, by introducing a second custom property. I want you to focus at the bottom part of the code here. So here I'm setting a general button is hovered and focused, and then I would read that color variable. I would fill that with a new custom property called hover color. This one would fall back to aquamarine, which is my primary button's hover state. Combine this with CSS nesting nowadays. Well, this is pretty much all the code you need to style 4 buttons, which is about 22 lines of CSS, which I think is brilliant. This is a beautiful little part of engineering code that works. It's nice to see. It's actually quite easy on the eyes as well once you get trained into it. So what if you want to create an extra button? Well, that's the beauty of the system. For example, maybe you want to add an orange button. Well, then you just add a new orange class or an orange outline class. And the only thing you have to do is set that that custom property to orange and the hover color to light salmon, meaning by just adding those 4 lines of CSS, you create another button as well. So this is really handy to do. It's a smart system. It's easy to manage. It's actually easy to expand, and if you would run in specificity issues, well, use add layer or add scope. We have so many tools to work with nowadays. But is this over-engineering? That's probably a question we should ask. For me personally, I don't think it is. We like to engineer on a lot of things. We like to name all our functions and all our stuff, but from the moment we have to name things in CSS, for some reason we don't want to do it. I actually like to call it smart engineering. Just having a bit of fun, making a beautiful little bit of engineering. So then I thought, let's take this a little bit further, and let me show you how you can engineer some grids with the same methodologies. This is what we're going to create. I'm telling you, keeping these demos really simple to start with. It is 3 columns, 5 items. Not a crazy grid, right? Now, we could do this the modern approach, but we're not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to write a bit of HTML. Let's give it the class grid, a nice little div with a class grid with some items inside of it, and I'm going to set my grid to display grid. Now I'm going to add grid template columns. Repeat 3 times, 1 fragment, meaning 3 columns equally sized, and a gap of 3 vmax, which is the largest side of my viewport. 3% of the largest side of my viewport. And already I would have something like this. But okay, it's true. I was laughing, but the other thing had all these MD tags and stuff, so that was responsive. This is not responsive yet. Now, what is responsive? For some reason, we're always adding stuff in breakpoints. I think the word break in that is really telling, to be honest. Why do you use breakpoints? It's not really needed. You can actually automate responsiveness this way. You can set your grid to repeat, to auto-fit the space, and have a minimum for each column of 450 pixels, for example, and a maximum of 1 fragment, being equally sized. This little one-liner of CSS already gets you pretty far. You would have something like this where you actually can make your grid smaller, and it's already perfectly responsive. No breakpoints needed. This works beautifully. But we see when I go smaller, I start to get a bit of overflow here. That's not what we want. But we can actually fix that. By adding a min function inside of our min value of min-max, we can say, hey, we want the minimum to be 450, and if that doesn't fit, it can be 100%. This one-liner of CSS is actually the only thing you need to create your fully, completely responsive grid without actually having to write 1 breakpoint. I think that's brilliant, but there's more. Because I do believe there's something I'd like to call engineering for understanding. If you would show this function to your favorite backend developer friend, or maybe your junior who just came from school, he'd probably be thinking like, I've been learning the wrong thing lately. So I believe that we can help those people. We can use our private custom properties to add a little bit of levers. And then I would just add those levers in there and set the min-max function, use that in there, so they only have to change those little custom properties to play around with. They don't have to go into the real code here. So it makes it a bit easier for them. But while we're at it, I mean, why not turn this into a system? So here I'm going to use a CSS layer. Still pretty much the same thing as before, just slapped a little layer around it. You'll see in a second why I'm doing this. So this could be like a default layout layer where we could add our default grid. Now, our design system sort of has a base. We have a default column minimum. I'm going to use that 450 again here, and a default gap of 3 vmax. This is our design system's basic idea here. Now what I think is what I would do is I would reuse that private variable system. What this would do, it sets a grid min, which will read the column minimum. And in that case, it would fall back to a default column minimum, which is my design system. So if column minimum is not defined, it's going to be 450 pixels. Same thing that I'm doing for the gap there, and I'm reading those items there at the bottom in the function and in the gap. The cool part about this, imagine I want to create a new grid. I could just add the grid class, add a new class there, product grid, for example, and I just have to set those 2 variables, saying that my column minimum for that product grid is 100 pixels, and the gap is, for example, a fixed 30 pixels. All of that together gives me a completely new grid, still working beautifully, magically, and it's still beautifully responsive. But what if the default actually changes of your design system? Well, you could add a media query inside of your root there, and then every gap would be just changed and cycle through everything in your grid, and everything would just work very nice, very simple. It's all changed by just 1 media query inside of your default. But don't stop there. Don't stop there. You are the engineer. You can make beautiful things here. Don't let any opportunity pass by. What you could do, if you could create a new class inside of your layout layer, for example, flex. And here I'm actually doing pretty much the same thing. I'm reading column minimum inside of a flex min variable here, and also falling back to that default system. Doing pretty much the same thing I did as before, but then in a flexbox manner. If I would have my beautiful grid, which was like this, then the only thing I would have to do is change my div class grid to a div class flex, and then I would have something like this, where items stretch out over the width. That's all you need. Work smarter. That's kind of the takeaway here. This is less code output. How many classes do you need to create a simple grid? Well, apparently 1 or 2. It's easy to maintain. It's easy to upgrade. It helps your sustainability if you think about it, because less code output, good for the environment. And please, if there's one thing I'd like to give you, is stop copying pretty pictures from a website. There is no small, there is no tablet, there is no desktop. The web is fluid. Don't believe in those breakpoints, they are a myth. Make everything fluid. But there's danger around the corner, because you always have that one guy, right? That one guy that thinks hashtag 333 is the perfect value for a column minimum, and probably did that change in a 70 files pull request. So what do you do if something like this happened? If only there was a way that we could debug this. And this is where addProperty comes in. So, addProperty, who has used addProperty? I should probably ask this one. Not many people, all right. Who uses TypeScript? Oh, you guys are going to love that. Okay, great. So what is addProperty? It's part of the CSSWG umbrella of APIs. It allows developers to explicitly define their CSS custom properties. We can do some type checking there, some constraining. We can set default values, just as we should do with other custom properties. Another cool part is that we can define whether a custom property should inherit or not, because by default they do, but here we can actually turn that off, which I think is pretty cool. This is currently almost at a 93% support, and when I say almost, I think it was last time I checked 92.98 or something, so really close. And this is the basic syntax. This is how you can define a custom, addProperty custom property. So this is just your root. You would set addProperty, give it a name, and then you can give it a syntax. For example, the syntax of color, because we want this to be a color. We can choose not to inherit it, and as the initial value, I'm using coffee. If you're wondering, it's not brown. It's kind of bluish kind of shade, just so you know. And there's a lot of these syntax options available. I have played with most of them. I don't think I've played with all of them, but I did play with most of them already. And, well, I think an example says more than 1,000 words, so I'm going to show you a few of them, but I want to start off with color because it's nice and visual, and it really helps us to get the understanding of things. So this is my property that I'm going to declare. So my custom property is the name color. It's going to naturally have the syntax color. I'm choosing to inherit. Doesn't really matter for this example. And the initial value is set to deep pink. Then I have a div. Well, actually I have 3 divs. And I'm going to read the variable color in there, and which I'm going to set in 3 classes, in color 1, color 2, and color 3. Now I'm using different color syntaxes. I'm using a hash code, I'm using RGB, I'm using OKLCH. It doesn't matter. CSS knows this, that this is a color syntax. That's all fine. CSS is aware. The output of that would just be those 3 colors. So what if that one guy comes along? And that one guy thinks, oh, shit. I should probably say this one as well. You see this in your DevTools as well. You have the syntax. You can actually hover over it, and you can see the current value, which syntax it is, and you can also see that it inherits and the initial value. You can see that in your DevTools. Very handy. So that one guy comes along and thinks that color is, well, 1 is a perfect value for a color. I mean, a person can do that. Now what would happen in this case? Well, it would fall back to that initial value. Be set to deep pink. But what's even more beautiful about this is that inside of my DevTools, I can actually see this. I get a nice little warning icon in there telling me that this is an invalid property value, and the expected type here is color. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper here. What if I want to give a set of colors? I can perfectly do this. Set the syntax to aquamarine or cyan or blue, so it has to be one of those 3 colors. So I The initial value here will have to be blue in this case, because otherwise it wouldn't add up. And then I actually have the same code as before. Those colors, none of them were aquamarine, cyan, or blue, so of course everything would turn blue. And once again, if I look inside of my dev tools, I can see that the expected type was aquamarine, cyan, or blue. Pretty handy feature. But it's also possible to add mixed values. For example, maybe you want something to be time or an integer. Maybe you want a person to enter 1 second or just 1. I don't know why you would do that. A better example might be this one. Perfectly for your margins and stuff. Maybe you want a margin of X pixels or rems and also want to allow the keyword auto, which can perfectly be done like this. What about a comma-separated list? For example, multiple background images. If you have an image and you put a hashtag behind it, that means it's a comma-separated list of images, or gradients in my example here. But comma-separated lists is not the thing we see a lot in CSS. Space-separated lists are far more common, right? Margins, box shadows, paddings. Well, in that case, you can do the plus symbol, which will mean it will use a space-separated list. All these things can be typed and can be checked. And also, it's nice to save yourself from some troubles inside of your design system. There's one limitation that I do need to tell you, and it is that the initial value must be supported by the browser. You can use the @supports feature query for that case, but otherwise things might get breakishy, to say it like that. But there's one big difference. There are a lot of TypeScript people, and I don't want to say anything bad to you guys, but there's one thing that CSS does a little bit better than TypeScript. We actually ship those types. And typing can actually help the browser. And that's where the cool stuff gets. So I wanted to create an animation. It was a scroll-driven animation, and the idea of the animation was that I would have a clipping mask. It was a circle, and the circle would go from the top left, a bit to the right, down, back to the left, and then would enlarge and reveal the image, so only the part inside of the circle was visible. So how I did the original setup of this, I added a few properties, just like move X, move Y, and scale. 0%, 0%, 20%. That was my initial idea. And then I set the height to a 400 VH of my body because I wanted a scroll bar and I'm lazy. And then I also added a little clip path in there, a circle which has the values for the scale, move X and move Y. The animation was called rotate orb and the animation timeline was scroll. So this is pretty much how that animation looked like. I would just update those custom properties, starting from 0, 0, going to 100, 0, going down, back to the left. You kind of see that happening there. And at the end, you see a scale of 150, like really blowing up that circle in a very big manner. I'm going to give you all like a few seconds to think what happened. What happens if I create this like that? Everybody got it? Everybody got an idea? Did it explode? Did my browser break? Did nothing happen? Well, this happened. So it actually jumped between the keyframes. Now remember what I said in the beginning of this presentation. A custom property can contain anything you want. So the browser does not know it can expect a percentage in the next keyframe. He doesn't know that. He's not sure about that. You could be entering an integer there. The browser has no idea. But now there is a way. Now we can tell the browser, like, hey, I got your back, man. This is a percentage. This custom property, move X, move Y, scale, these are all percentages, and you can expect the percentages in your next keyframe. So if I would remove the root declaration of those custom properties and replace it with this, then the browser knows. And then I will have my smooth animation by just updating those custom properties. Pretty sweet, right? I think that's pretty sweet. That's another one that I did with that. So then you can go a bit crazy and create like a whole bunch of masking and turning. And I mean, it's all good fun. Yeah, just playing some stuff. But it opens up a window of possibilities. So a typical one that you see is U-rotation. That's one where it's been used a lot of times. So you can set the syntax to angle, which will use a degree. And for example, the hue wheel is a degrees in 0 to 360 degrees. Nice, the color wheel, that's what we want to do. So you have a keyframe that spins the kind of thing, goes to 360 degrees. And what I would do, I would use an HSL, hue, saturation, lightness, color scheme, and I would set the hue to take that angle, meaning it would constantly turn with a spin animation for as long as I want. And then you can create these kind of effects where you see the nice little change of glow, and it's beautiful, and it's colors. But the beauty of this is that I'm only changing one custom property in total. So if you combine this with rotating of a div and some gradients and some other stuff, well, you only need one animation to actually create this kind of thing. This is one animation. Don't think the screen does it justice, but there's a gradient spinning in the back here as well, which I think is pretty cool. Also, if somebody takes a picture of this, I might get a raise. Just don't try. It's worth a try. But you can take it further. How about updating offset distances to animate around the path, or transforms using the transform list? I've shown this a little bit in the syntax here, but to kind of wrap it up, the idea that I would do is I have a star offset, which is a percentage. I have the opacity, which is a number from 0 to 1 in this case. And I have a transform, which was a transform list with space separated. You know, you have scale, you have translate X, for example. All of these things together using properties. Well, the next thing you see is a scroll-driven animation with just HTML and CSS. And it was my Christmas card of last year, which I think was pretty fun. So this is just using add property and animating a bunch of keyframes. And I think that really opens up a lot of opportunities here. So much fun. Oh, wait, one more thing. Right, so an initial value can have a calc function. I don't know why you would use it, but you can. Just giving that out there. So what about functions? I promised you functions. I haven't really talked about functions in detail. So let's start with a simple one. Let's start with fluid typography. It's been there for a while. It's something we can use. It has the clamp function has a lot of support nowadays. You can use fluid typography with ease. So here I have a title. I have a nice little clamp in there. It's now working on viewport. You can do that for containers as well. I mean, I'll leave that up to you. But you can actually change the font size based on your window. So this is kind of the thing that happens. But I want you to take a close attention right there to the bottom. You kind of see, even though if you cannot read the value perfectly, but you see that I have a comma separate value from my font size here. It's comma, it's not a beautiful full integer. And I had one colleague coming to me who was actually like, hey man, subpixels are bad, you should not do that. So there's a way, because I've shown you in the beginning, CSS can round things now. So what you could do is you could wrap that clamp function inside of a round function and have the rounding interval set to 1 pixels. That's pretty much the thing that the thing at the bottom there does, and it's using that title size, which already has the clamp inside of it. All of this combined kind of gives me the opportunity to create that fluid typography. Looks a little bit less fluid, but still doing pretty much the same thing. But here you see that I don't have any comma values anymore. So that's a little win there that I kind of liked, and I just wanted to show off to the guy as well, so that's kind of the reason why I did that. But, I mean, we also have these awesome color functions nowadays. Now, this was something that I saw by Matthias Odd a long time ago, and the idea was that the primary color, for example, no KLCH color space, would be inside of a variable. Then you could use the OKLCH function. Now, what this does, it says, from that primary color, give me 10% of the lightness, keep the chroma and the hue exactly the same. Just change the lightness to 10%. The second one, you say change the lightness to 20%. You do the same for 90 and for 100. That's all that does. And with that, you can actually have one primary color input and create your own little pattern, changing the lightness. But Matthias went beyond that, because he was thinking like, this is all nice, but it's not perfect yet. It's not beautiful yet. And then he said, and I don't know if it's going to add up here. You can see a little difference, right? This is the previous one. This is the second one. It's subtle, but it's there. It starts with more darks, and it kind of gets a little bit more vibrant at the middle and kind of goes flat at the end. It's like a nice little wave, right? So it feels like a wave. It's very vibrant in the middle, flattening in the end, almost pastel-like. So what is a wave? Well, we have something in CSS for that, right? which is called trigonometric functions. What if we could use that color function and actually change the chroma by adding a little sine wave in there, multiplying this by pi, and that way you can actually create that sharpness in the middle and that flat item there at the end, by just having a little base modifier that you kind of can play around with. It's not a real science here, it's more like a feeling, like a bit more, a bit less. And then you can create this kind of system. Now, I will be sharing a link for this today, but I created a tool for this, which was Ocal Chroma. Thought it was a fun pun. And you can actually change the whole thing, like play around with these colors, and then you can create your own little sneak preview of a pattern. What I also did was give the chance for other color inputs, such as RGB. Very nice to play around with sliders. I love playing around with sliders. And that way, yeah, you will create this one little input color pattern, and you can just copy the CSS right there. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need. Thought it was a nice thing to make a tool out of. Totally worth it. But we are only getting started when it comes to functions. Currently in Chrome and Edge, there's a whole bunch of fun stuff going on, which I am really excited for. One of them is sibling index and sibling count. So sibling index will just give you a number, which is the current index of your siblings. Sibling count will count, including itself, the siblings. Including itself, that's an important one here. So what you could do, you could, for example, have a rotation for cards. So set the default rotation to 8 degrees. And then we kind of want to get a nice fan of cards, so you kind of need to calculate a center point, which you can do by the amount of siblings we have. How many cards do we have in our hand? And based on that, we can find the center. So that is pretty much what is happening here. Then we set a rotate transform in there. We set the rotation by a card and multiply this by the sibling index and minus the center index. And that way, we can kind of do this. So the demo says probably more than the explanation. So this is just one line of calculations of CSS to find that little center point in there. And it's so much fun to play around with because it's simple, it's fast, it doesn't need any hard calculations of you. Why use JavaScript for this, right? I mean, if you can use this with CSS, it's so much more performant, so much less code, and it just works. But then I thought about another one. So if I would have a starting hue of 180, which is sort of a teal sort of color, and then I would have an end color, which was 300. It's the 180 plus the 120. 300 sort of a magenta color. Then I thought, like, if I have a range of 120, I could just cut that in half. Each time another card comes in, I could just get a range between all these hues that are between teal and magenta. And that's what's happening right here, using LCH, keeping the lightness, keeping the chroma, and just changing that hue based on the amount of items that's there in the middle. It's a small calculation, but it can really help you a lot to make something like this. So the beginning and end color are the same thing, but you just change the amount of colors in the middle. That's like going through that hue wheel. And I think it's just math, right? There's no really big science in here. There's just simple math that you can do with CSS. Or this one I did together with Amit Sheed, where you could actually change the color while moving your mouse with JavaScript, changing that with add property, adding frames, using the sibling count, and then you can turn that around and you kind of see the color changing while your mouse is moving. It takes like 30 lines of JS for that, and all the rest is just plain old CSS, so a lot of fun. I'm not so good with the 3D stuff, that's kind of why I asked a bit of help for that. You gotta be honest about this stuff. So the other thing, is the actual CSS functions. Add function is really becoming a thing. So this is a simple example of a CSS function that you can use in Chrome nowadays. For example, you have a negative function that'll take a value. The result of that would be a calculation that returns with a -1 times the value. So just give me back the negative number. It's pretty much all that does. And you can call that by setting margin, negative, and then add the gap in there, for example, of a custom property, and we'll switch that to a negative value. Or how about this? If you, I might have gone a bit too far there, right? But you could actually use this to create a transform, to change the position based on a circle. If you want a whole bunch of siblings to be placed on a circle, you could create something like this, but you can make this code a little bit more readable by actually using those CSS functions. I'm not going to go in detail on circle calculation here. Don't worry, it's way too late to do maths like that. But in the end, like, this code is really everything that you see happening here. That is. Just that bit of code is doing this whole thing. It's just maths. And I'm really not that good at maths, to be honest. So I think I was happy I pulled that off. And last but not least, we also have CSS conditionals taking the stage. So I wanted to create a bar chart. I thought this was a very simple example where I would just add a bunch of inline styles that had a value. Then I would change the height of each bar based on that value inside of my CSS. But then I had this one item that had the perfect hundreds, perfect scores, so I thought I could use a CSS conditional. Check if a style has the value of 100 in there, and then I can set the content perfect, and otherwise leave an empty string. Now, together with symbol index for a bit of animation, that's the thing that happens. So you get a nice little perfect in there. So much fun. You can also use this for support, which I think is handy to have it as a little one-liner. You can check if something has a support. In that case, and this one is OKLCH support. Yeah, you can check if it has OKLCH support. Then you would read that OKLCH, and else you could fall back to a hash caller. That's pretty much how that one goes. And another cool idea that I saw from Bramus recently, but I think it's a really fun one. So we already have the light-dark function in CSS, but it's only been used for colors. What if you have a background and you want to change that? Well, by using a function, you can create your own little light-dark function, set this into a function, and then you can check inside of that function if a color scheme is dark, well, return the one, or otherwise return the other. So you have your own little two inputs for like a light or a dark SVG. It just goes into the function, and it'll give you the right thing based on your color scheme, which I really like. So, CSS engineering, I kind of wanted to give you all a little taste, because I do believe that it is no gimmick. It is smart, and it's actually very performant as well. And I know it's not always the easiest thing, but I do believe that CSS engineering is for you. It's for all of you. And one person might be a bit faster on this stuff. Like, I am very bad at React, for example. I'm not good with React. I like CSS. Other people are a bit different, and that's fine. But I can promise you one thing, that if you take your time for it and just try it step by step, try a little bit more playing around with those custom properties, trying some of those new functions, then I can tell you that one day you will have this nice little click inside of your head. And that day might actually be the day that you realize that CSS is actually programming. Thank you.
Give it up for thank you, Brecht, for showing us your CSS magic. I think we're all convinced that CSS is a program language, as we just seen.
I hope so.
If you guys have another opinion, you can fight them here on stage. We will have popcorn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have time for some questions.
We have a bit of time left, so yeah. Oh, Kilian, do I dare to take this question?
I have two, but I'll ask one. Can you scope as property?
That's a good question. I don't even know that.
Great.
No, I really don't. I haven't tried that. That's a good question, actually. I'll try that out later today. I don't think you can, because add property is setting variables on a root level. So I would be surprised that you can, but I do not dare to say that it's not the case because I haven't tried it. But by design, I don't think it will work, but might be mistaken there.
So if I had written all those examples and given them to you and you'd seen them for the first time, would you, as someone with a lot of CSS experience, would you know what they do without looking at the output?
Yes and no. So yes, I would know what they do, but for example, for circle calculation, I am not that good with math. I'm like, yeah, that's a circle. I mean, that would take a bit of a time, and you start with cosinus and sinus and stuff like that. I think that's normal. But when it comes to like simple things such as staggering animations with sibling index, like I see that on the fly. Yeah, for sure. The grid, yeah. Yeah, the grid, perfect. Yeah, the grids, I use that every day. Like, yeah, I get that. Yeah?
Yeah, well, for the grid example, I think that's a great example. For me, like, it's so unintuitive, it still is. Like, I read that line, like, it's all the way at the start of your presentation, right? And that's still my big issue with it. Like, it is very hard to use for basically anyone who is not using it on a daily basis. I did RESTBoss's tutorial on it, like this in 5 weeks ago or something. And it was really good, and I knew it for a week. And then it was gone, because it's just so, it doesn't make that much sense. And now, you're asking like, why is CSS, how would you argue that it isn't a programming language? It's because you cannot make an abstraction that fixes that for you. You cannot write your own version that is a parameterized abstraction over that, except if you use less or SAS, where you can do that, right? You can make a mixin that does that. But in CSS,
well, sorry to say this, but here's the newsflash for you. Mixins are becoming a thing of the CSS spec.
Right, that's the thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I think like if you have these kinds of systems set in place, like this basic grid system, like I have this little demo space where I have that, and then I don't even think about that anymore. Because it works so fast, I'm like, okay, you need NuGrid here, a few custom properties change, hey, this one works perfectly, on to the next. It actually goes, I can actually challenge a lot of people in here that I'll do it faster than most would start typing like 30 class names.
That's the issue.
But is it though?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
I'm pretty slow at writing hooks, to be honest. So, I mean.
Yeah, so you mean like it's okay if you have one person in your team who's good at it?
Hopefully a bit more, or some people that are a little bit better in it. But I mean, that's kind of where I'm going at. Like there are specialties. I can write React. I know a colleague of mine who writes it 10 times better than I do. Which is great, that's perfect. When we create something together, something magically happens, to be honest. I mean, and that's kind of the thing that I'd like to harness as well, because we all live in an age where AI is taking also a lot of steps, and we have these tools that can help us get better at that as well, or make it easier. But still, like if you have collaborations like that, those can be priceless. And so, yeah, I do believe that specialization is an important part in this story. Yeah.
And it's always a trade-off. I know that the standards committees tried very hard, right? And it took so long to get it through, and that's why it became what it eventually became.
True.
So I know it's hard, right?
Yeah.
So that's my main beef.
There's a lot of these niche things also, like for example, if you have the results that you do for a function to return it, why is it not return? Well, the simple reason is the order doesn't matter in CSS. You can write that in the middle of your function and it will just return, so it doesn't work the same thing as it would in JavaScript. So there are differences in there for sure. It's a different language in the end. Yeah.
The inputs and outputs of functions, can those be typed?
Huh.
And should they?
They should. They should. Do they? Can you tell me?
I think so.
No? They should. Write a ticket for the CSS working group.
You said that in example JavaScript is often slower to make animations, etc. I think we all know that. With all these new features, have you found like performance limitations?
Yeah.
In rendering?
Yeah, for sure. So there's two sides. It's like one of them is definitely, you said, with all these new features, like I am completely aware that CSS has been like really been mental the last 2 years. If you see the amount of features that are getting added, that's a true thing. So but if you are using transforms, you are not using the main thread. So in that regard, if you use a JavaScript animation, it's always going to be on the main thread. So that's why I love the separation of concerns so much as well, because that makes all your stuff faster, and you can like use your JS to do like the really heavy stuff, and it's not going to be starting interrupted because, hey, I want to fan out the deck of cards. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the idea there.
But have you seen, for example, if an animation, like on a regular machine, that if you make a lot of CSS, that makes things wrong in that sense? Like,
I'm sure there's limitations, like, but I think that those limitations are pretty much the same for anything what you would use for animations. I mean, if you have a really old computer, chances are high that it's not going to be a very performant machine for certain animations, especially if you then would start to animate things such as margins, which doesn't run off the main thread anymore. Yeah, then you're polluting the main thread again, and we're back to where we came from, to be honest. So yeah, you can always break things. That's what I love about the web, right? You can break stuff. It's the Wild West. Look, team, awesome. Yeah, so.
Okay, no more questions? Then give it up for Brecht.
Thank you.